Torrontés is easy to drink. The slightly more serious Torrontés are much more kind of elegant and focused and fresh. I think those are beautiful wines for the Asian cuisine or sushi or, those aromatic grape varieties like Gewürztraminer or Muscat that has lots of kind of flavors of its own. And they work quite nicely with slightly spicier foods, which can be hard to pair with other wines. You need to make sure that, that your dish is equally as aromatic and flavorful. And then also it's quite light-bodied. So, you don't want to go down the road of heavy meat or cream. So those are my recommendations. Asian cuisine and sushi, and still by the swimming pool.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 266. Which types of global dishes can you pair with South American wines? What's one of the best but least known Chilean wine regions that you need to try? And which types of wines do they make in other South American countries, such as Uruguay, Peru, Bolivia, and Brazil? In today's episode, you'll hear the stories and tips that answer those questions in part 2 of our chat with Amanda Barnes, author of the South American Wine Guide. You don't need to have listened to part 1 from last week first, but I hope you'll go back to it if you missed it after you finish listening to this one. One of you is going to win a copy of Amanda's beautiful hardcover book. All you need to do is email me and let me know that you'd like to win. I'll choose one person randomly from those who contact me at natalie@nataliemclean.com. I also still have one copy left of How to Taste, a guide to discovering flavor and savoring life by Mandy Neglich to give away, as well as one copy of Vintage Crime, a short history of wine fraud by Master of Wine Rebecca Gibb. So let me know if you'd like to win any one of these 3 books. I hope you had a wonderful holiday. Are you thinking of doing dry January or damp January, or even perhaps moderating your wine consumption throughout 2024? Well, if so, I wanted to let you know about a new online drinks calculator developed by Wine Growers Canada, a nonprofit organization that represents Canadian wineries. You can use this tool to calculate how many standard drinks you're consuming of any type of wine. Doesn't have to be Canadian. So why should we measure how much wine or alcohol we're consuming? Well, I think there's a reason we don't eat an entire chocolate cake at dinner, even though some of us would love to. That excess doesn't taste or feel good, nor is it good for us. We're also not savoring the cake as we would with the right-sized serving, the right amount. I think wine is like that too. It's the drink of conversation over a good meal, meant to be savored slowly for all its sensory pleasures. There's a reason wine isn't served in a shooter glass. It's not meant to be knocked back quickly, like some other alcoholic drinks. So what is the right amount of wine to consume? Well, that varies by person, and for some, the right amount is none because of a medical condition, pregnancy, or a host of other reasons. Health Canada's guidelines remain the same as they were in 2011. 2 drinks maximum per day for women, maximum 10 per week, and 3 per day for men, or 15 per week. There's been a lot of confusion recently about the new so-called Canadian guidelines stating that the maximum amount is 2 drinks per week, and others stipulating that no amount of alcohol is safe. However, these recommendations are not federally endorsed by Health Canada. Rather, they come from a special interest group called the Canadian Centre for Substance Abuse, CCSA, that has a mandate of abstinence or zero alcohol. In my opinion, their recommendations have caused a lot of unnecessary fear and despair among those of us who love wine, but who want a healthy relationship with it. Wine is part of the cuisine of many diverse cultures and part of social well-being for many of us. It's the way we get together with others over a family meal or out at a restaurant or at a friend's house. Now, in my book, Wine Witch on Fire, Rising from the Ashes of Divorce, Defamation, and Drinking Too Much, I share openly about how I started leaning on wine too hard during my no good, terrible, very bad vintage, both personally and professionally 10 years ago. I asked my therapist, Miranda, if I should stop drinking altogether and go sober, one of several sessions I include in the book. After all, my father was an alcoholic, and alcoholism or alcohol use disorder runs on both sides of my family. Miranda thought that would be punitive and that we should focus on harm reduction first. The health benefits when we move from excessive drinking to moderate drinking are far greater than those derived from moderate drinking to zero drinking. I didn't mean to write a self-help book, but it's turned into that in terms of how early readers are responding to it. Now, yes, I admit I am biased. I love wine, and I earn my living by writing about it. But I am also passionate about spreading its pleasures, and I believe that many people can enjoy it without having to decide between all or nothing. The tips on how I cut back are in the book, and I shared them in an editorial piece this week that was published in the Vancouver Sun, Calgary Herald, Ottawa Citizen, Montreal Gazette, and several other newspapers. I also talked about them on CTV's morning show, CTV News, and the 6 p.m. newscasts last week when I was discussing the new drinks calculator. I should note that I volunteered to do this, again because I believe in the message of moderation, and Wine Growers Canada is not compensating me in any way. One of the things that makes calculating the right amount challenging is that not all wine glasses are created equal. Some glasses are fairly small, like a traditional champagne flute glass, and yet I've seen others that are so large they can hold the contents of an entire bottle. And then after you're finished, you can use them for a steam facial. Similarly with wine, we assume that all 750 ml bottles of wine contain 5 glasses of wine, so 5 standard drinks. But that's not the case. One bottle can have 4 standard drinks and another 7 because they have very different levels of alcohol. All of these factors come into play when understanding the right amount of wine for you. The new drinks calculator allows you to plug in the number of ounces or milliliters of wine that you're pouring, the amount of alcohol in the wine, which you'll find on the bottle label in small type, and then it'll tell you how many standard drinks that is. So for example, a 5-ounce pour of wine with 12% alcohol is 1 standard drink. But if the wine has 15% alcohol, then you have to go down to a 4-ounce pour to equal 1 standard drink, which, by the way, can look very small in your glass. That's why I try to drink lower alcohol wines, those that are under 13%. During the TV segments, I got out a measuring cup and showed how dramatically different a 3, 6, and 9-ounce pour looks in the same sized glass. It's something I suggest you do as well so that you know how much you're consuming and visually you can gauge what it looks like. Though I do not recommend bringing a measuring cup to a restaurant because, well, that's just weird. Check out the drinks calculator at therightamount.ca. I'll put this link in the show notes. If you haven't got your copy of Wine Witch on Fire, Rising from the Ashes of Divorce, Defamation, and Drinking Too Much yet, and would like to support it and this podcast that I do on a volunteer basis, please order it from any online book retailer, no matter where you live. It will usually arrive in a day or two, and of course, the ebook is instant. Every little bit helps spread the message in this book of hope, justice, and resilience. I'll put a link in the show notes to all retailers worldwide at nataliemaclean.com/266. If you've read the book or are reading it, I'd love to hear from you at natalie@nataliemaclean.com. I'd also love to hear from you with ideas about who we should have on the podcast this year. I'm looking for guests who are great storytellers who can entertain and educate us at the same time. They could be writers, winemakers, sommeliers, chefs, or experts in other related areas such as health and wine, cheese and wine, charcuterie and wine. Well, you get the idea. If you have any other suggestions on how to improve this podcast, please let me know. Okay, on with the show. Yeah, and Torrontés, I love the way you pronounce things. It's so much better because you're a native Spanish speaker, right? I think.
Well, not native.
Not native, but sorry, bilingual.
Yeah, I speak. Yeah, so I've been here long enough that I can defend myself.
That's always important. Torrontés is the sort of flagship white wine of Argentina, the one it's best known for, and it's a beautiful floral expression of a grape. Was it originally a cross of 3 different Spanish grapes?
No, so this is one of the ones that is the child of those 2 varieties that I mentioned, the first that came to South America, so Listan Prieto and Moscatelli Alejandría.
Okay. And
the 3 that you're talking about is there are 3 varieties of Torrontés. We have Torrontés Riojano, which is the most planted and the highest quality, and that is a direct descendant of them too. It's a cross of them both. A native, it's kind of happened naturally in the vineyards. And then we've got San Juanino, which is the same, but every time a grape crosses, you have a different child. It's like, parents and children.
Sure.
And so, again, it's a Torrontés, but it's a different variety. We call it Torrontés San Juanino. And then we've got Torrontés Mendocino, which we actually don't know who one of the parents was. Huh. So it's a completely different ballgame, but has similar expressions. But the one that you're most likely to be drinking is Riojano.
Okay.
And the names are related to where they were discovered. Rioja in Argentina, San Juan in Argentina, and Mendoza in Argentina, but they're not related to necessarily where they're grown today. So Riojano is grown all over Argentina, and most of the wines in Salta and Cafayate are Riojano. So yeah, it's a more complex topic than probably most people want to be listening to at this while drinking wine.
Sure.
But in my book, I do detail.
Yes.
I do detail the differences between them. And it is an ongoing kind of study here to figure out those differences and how to, where they're best suited and how to vinify them best.
And of course, because you're in the southern hemisphere, as you go south, it gets colder. Because north in their country, it's closer to the equator. So Torrontés, you were mentioning Salta, which is more in the south end of the country. North. It's north? Okay, I'm completely confusing everybody.
Salta is the one that's right up in the north in Cafayate.
Okay.
One of the northernmost ones.
And where's Patagonia in relation to that?
In the south.
In the south, okay.
Far in the south.
Far in the south. So do they also grow Torrontés in Patagonia?
Yes, they do. I mean, Torrontés can grow anywhere, really, but they're more interested in cooler climate varieties like Chardonnay, Riesling, Gewürztraminer.
Okay.
In the south and Patagonia. But Patagonia is very big as well, so it's difficult to, you've got traditional regions like Rio Negro, Neuquén, which are the beginning of Patagonia, and there you can ripen Cabernet Sauvignon. It's not that cold.
Okay.
And then we've got the new emerging Patagonia, which is much further south, which is Chubut. And that's where, I think some people have Merlot planted, some people have Malbec planted, but typically it's more Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Gewürztraminer, earlier ripening, cooler climate varieties.
Okay. And what do you like to pair with Torrontés? Like, do you have some favorite food pairings?
Yeah, I mean, Torrontés is the first wine. When I got here as kind of, on a backpacker budget, it was the first wine that I really was always convinced that you could buy it for very little and it was easy to drink and very nice. And it was a solid kind of white wine to drink chilled and have by the swimming pool or, with friends just by itself. There was slightly more serious Torrontés that there are now, which are, much more kind of elegant and focused and fresh. I think those are beautiful wines for kind of Asian cuisine or sushi or, those aromatic grape varieties like Gewürztraminer or Muscat. They're always nice with something that's quite kind of aromatic and has lots of kind of flavors of its own. And they work quite nicely with, slightly spicier foods, which can be hard to pair with other wines.
It's true.
So I like Torrontés for that kind of, cuisine. But it can overwhelm a very simple dish. So that's the challenge with Torrontés. You've got a highly aromatic grape variety. So you need to make sure that, that your dish is equally as aromatic and flavorful. And then also it's quite light bodied. So You don't want to go down the road of heavy meats or anything like that, or kind of cream or anything. This is quite a kind of delicate, lighter bodied grape. So those are my recommendations, kind of
Sounds good.
Asian cuisine and definitely kind of sushi, and still by the swimming pool.
Yeah, absolutely. And favorite food pairings for Malbec? Maybe an unusual one as well?
Well, it depends on the type of Malbec,
Sure.
because you've got all those different kind of ranges of styles. I mean, there's nothing better than a classic steak with Malbec. But unusual for Malbec, I mean, some of the really nice kind of lighter, more fine kind of bodied and focused, precise, linear, less oak expressions, I think you can treat like you would some Italian wines. And so, I quite like, if I'm making a nice pasta dish or anything, even if it's a kind of white-based sauce, like I'd still consider Malbec for those pairings, because those kind of modern contemporary styles of Malbec, they don't require the fat or the kind of, grilled flavors in order to pair with them. They're much more delicate. They're much more kind of focused on spice and fruit and nice acidity. So they're a lot more versatile in pairings.
Speaking of fat and grill, of course, the traditional Argentine method, you've called it a fire cooking culture, the asado, the outdoor barbecue or grill. Let's talk about the empanadas that are often part of that, an early part of the meal. Why are they so iconic as in the meal?
I think many years ago, I was writing an article about a humble empanada and actually looking at the world variations. I think every culture has their version of an empanada. Like in England, we have the pasty. Like, in India, they have the samosa. Everyone's got their empanada. But here in South America, Brazil has pastéis. In Chile and Argentina, it's both the empanada, the same as in Uruguay. But everyone has their version of empanada.
A pastry, essentially, right?
Yeah, a pastry stuffed with something.
Yes.
A pie. And so in Argentina, it changes as well. The meat empanada is the classic, but the recipe changes depending on where you are. So if you're in the north, in Salta, it will typically have more spices. It will have a little bit of ají, a little bit of chili pepper in there, and raisins if you're more kind of towards the east, that kind of sweetness. They might add some sugar in Cordoba, where they have real sweet tooth. And then in Mendoza, the typical empanada has about 50% onion.
Oh.
So it's quite high on the onion quantity, and potato. And, there can be differences in terms of whether you're adding olive or a hard-boiled egg or, your balance of onion and all the rest. So I think it's just become the symbol of each region is their particular empanada style. And they're just, perfect little morsels to have either during the day for like a lunch or, the way that you start and open up your evening of asado, and it's the first thing that comes out of the grill, and normally in like a pasta in a kind of clay oven style grill. You cook them before you start with the meat and all the rest, and they're just delicious. And the pairing varies as well. So in the north they will pair Torrontés, and here in Mendoza it will always be Malbec. So they're just lovely kind of regional expressions of different places and their favorite kind of pairings, and they're delicious.
I've heard lard or fat is the key to a great empanada.
It is, yeah, it is. I have a recipe in my book, actually, which is from a really great chef here in Mendoza. And some people might get a little bit worried about the quantity of lard, but but it's good. It's all collagen, it's fine. But it's, lard is the typical. You can switch that out for olive oil, which is fine. It doesn't have the same kind of lovely flakiness or taste, but olive oil is a suitable alternative for a healthier lifestyle.
Okay. So Argentina also produces more Fernet, a bitter aromatic spirit, more so than Italy, where it was first created. What's in this drink, and why is Argentina so enthusiastic about it?
Yeah, Fernet is definitely one of the most consumed drinks here in Argentina. So it's a bitter. It's a typical Italian bitter, kind of aperitif. It's about 40%. And it came from the Italian immigrants. When they all came here, they brought their traditions of these bitters as well.
40% alcohol?
A fair amount.
Sorry. Yeah. Whiskey style.
Yeah, 40% alcohol.
Level.
Exactly. Yeah. So in Italy, they would drink it as an aperitif or a digestif. So before or after a meal by itself. In Argentina, it's a slightly different way that they consume it. They consume it with Coca-Cola, so Fernet y Cola. So it's always blended with Coca-Cola. And the funniest thing is when you go to a barbecue in the mountains And they will just cut through the Coca-Cola bottle, take off the kind of top, and have the entire litre of Coke filled with ice and Fernet.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And when I first got here, I was like, okay, well, if this is what everyone's drinking, sure, I'll give it a go. But actually, you do realise, if you drink a lot of Fernet in one night, you realise that it is a digestif. You do not want to be drinking it by the litre, or at least, you know, a sensitive English stomach does not enjoy drinking it by the litre. So I don't actually drink Fernet anymore because I find it intense. And I don't like Coca-Cola either.
No. What makes it a digestif?
It is the bar drink.
What is it about bitters that make them...
Yeah, all the bitters. I mean, they were used as medicine before, weren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, again, I'm not sure exactly why the bitters or, you know, arrowroot and things like that, why they kind of have that digestive property, but they do.
Yeah, but they do settle.
The Fernet's a big deal here.
Process.
I think they drink more than Italy.
All right, okay.
I think they drink far more. But the other thing that's coming back in fashion here, which has always been kind of popular, is vermouth. And again, from that kind of Italian and Spanish ancestry, you know, the immigrant ancestry that we have here. And that's been really nice. Like during the pandemic, a lot of winemakers, you know, they were stuck inside. They weren't traveling. They weren't doing all the extra things that they normally do on top of their, you know, job making wine. And so a lot of them kind of turned their hand to making interesting vermouths and gins and different things from a base of wine. And so we've got this lovely craft gin and also craft vermouth movement happening here at the hand of many winemakers. Sebastian Zuccardi's probably the one with the most famous brand today, La Fuerza. And a lot of them have been going out to the mountains and collecting the botanicals from the Andes, you know, so that they really are reflecting the terroir in that sense. Not only a base of local wine, but with the botanical base collected and foraged with native species here. So that's really nice too. I haven't seen many artisanal Fernets yet. I'd say Fernet is more the kind of cola in Argentina, and then like the vermouth is more the, you know, fine wine spectrum.
Yeah, I don't think something can be artisanal when you're opening up a liter of Coke. Like, that just sounds really...
I think anything that you chuck Coke in has already lost it for me.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not...
Yeah.
I'm an anti-Coca-Cola girl. I do drink tonic, though, so I shouldn't...
Oh, well.
Pot calling kettle black.
So how does the production, just going back to some comparisons between Argentina and Chile, how do they differ in production volume?
Well, that can depend on the year. They're actually quite similar in terms of hectares and production. There are some years in which Chile is bigger. There are some years in which Argentina is bigger. Normally, Argentina is just slightly ahead of Chile, but it really has fluctuated and does fluctuate depending on the vintage and also depending on the market. But there's quite a significant difference in culture in that Argentina, you know, still about half the production is consumed within Argentina, whereas the large majority of Chile's production is exported. That's also because of population difference. You know, Chile is has a much smaller population, but Argentina has a strong culture. They never lost that culture of drinking a lot of wine. And it's only in recent years that they're kind of losing that culture. You know, like most other countries around the world, unfortunately, where, you know, we're not drinking at lunchtime, we're more kind of moderating our consumption. And that's definitely happening in Argentina too. But Chile kind of switched due to some political pressure, actually, and the culture kind of switched more from wine to less kind of not drinking during the day, no siesta culture. Here in Mendoza, there is still a siesta culture. So people still take a break during the day, which makes drinking wine at lunch, you know, acceptable and easy to do because you're having a nap.
Right.
You're not working.
It's true.
Whereas in Chile, that hasn't been the culture for decades. So the wine drinking culture is a lot less, you know, not as strong in Chile. And there's a lot more consumption of spirits as well. Pisco, obviously. So those are the kind of big differences, I'd say, in terms of kind of production and where it goes.
Yeah. If Chile's such a great exporter, a larger exporter than Argentina as a percentage, why didn't they establish Carmenere as a better calling card, if you will, internationally, as compared to what Argentina did with Malbec?
Well, they only discovered that they had Carmenere in 1994, which is relatively new.
Okay.
So they'd already began establishing their, you know, and you think 1994, 24th of November, 1994, the story of Carmenere is, coincidentally, came to visit a winery called Carmen, and was in the vineyard walking around with a group that was visiting Chile for a conference. And the winemaker at the time, Alvaro Espinosa, who's an excellent winemaker, he was like, can you come and look at my Merlot? Like, there's something different. We call this Merlot Chileno. They didn't call it Merlot like the other Merlot. They called it Merlot Chileno. They thought it was maybe a different clone, or something had happened to their Merlot because it would, taste slightly different. Similar kind of ripening cycle, but would taste different. And the leaves would go quite bright, flaming red, whereas Merlot wouldn't do that to the same extent. And the wine, the grapes tasted slightly different. So everyone knew there was a difference between this Merlot, like Bordeaux Merlot, and this Merlot Chileno. And this ampelographer was there in the vineyard, and it was in springtime, and he could see the stamens of the grapevine had this different curly perspective. They kind of like curl around in a very different way to Merlot. And he was like, I think this is Carmenere. And everyone was like, you're absolutely nuts. Like, of course, it's not this extinct variety from the 1800s in Bordeaux that no one has anymore. It has to be something else. But sure enough, they did the tests and it is Carmenere.
Wow.
Now, some wineries were brave enough in 1994, those in the area, in the vicinity in Maipo, to start bottling as Carmenere. They actually called it Grand Vidour, which is a synonym. Some wineries started bottling in 95, 96 with Carmenere as their grape variety. But it took several years to actually convince most people in the industry that it wasn't their commercially acceptable Merlot that everyone knows in the world, that's easy to sell, that it was Carmenere. It was this totally new variety. You imagine going from having a production of something that you can sell easily in the market internationally
True.
to suddenly finding out that your vineyard is this rare, weird, crazy variety that no one knows how to make it because it hasn't been made for hundreds of years. And so it's been a real process. Like, it's a real challenge that Chile's been faced with. And I think it's been very brave, actually, that most of the producers, many of them got rid of it and regrafted with Merlot, but plenty of them kept their Carmenere and kept working with it. Plenty have actually planted Carmenere as a new variety. And it's been a process. It takes time to figure out how to vinify a certain wine and how long, they'd spent so long treating it as Merlot with the same irrigation, the same viticulture management, picking at the time for Merlot, looking for those molar qualities. And so actually figuring out, let's look at this, let's treat this totally separately to Merlot now, and let's figure out the identity of Carmenere. It's taken time. Mm-hmm. And I think they're doing a really good job. I think in recent years, we're really starting to see some beautiful Carmeneres coming through. And I think it's much more similar in profile to Cabernet Franc than it is Merlot. So if I were to describe Carmenere to someone who's never tried it before, I would say, think of Cabernet Franc. And then, there are some slight differences. It can be a little bit more kind of pink pepper in Carmenere typically, rather than, what you find in Cabernet Franc. It can have it's got softer tannins, and, it's got that slightly kind of softer acidity as well. But I think it's definitely more similar in profile to Cabernet Franc. I don't think it will ever be the flagship. I don't think it will ever be number one in Chile. I think Cabernet Sauvignon is going to remain king in Chile.
Sure.
And I think Chile does an excellent job with Cabernet Sauvignon. So it will always be a niche variety, I think. But, you've got to give Chileans credit because it was a big risk to take. And, it's not easy for them to sell Carmenere even today. No one can say it. It's hard to spell. And, True. You don't have Carmenere in many places in the world.
It's like Viognier and Gewürztraminer and all those grapes. They should form a club. They need a little help. Let's chat briefly about the other countries mentioned in your book, starting with Uruguay. Maybe just a real top line, because I can't believe how fast the time is flying here. But what's their signature grape, their famous region, a fun fact, if you will? What would you say about Uruguay?
So Uruguay, the signature grape is Tannat. Mm-hmm. And again, a tough wine that, it's only really produced in the kind of Madiran. And I know there's some lots of plantings happening in Texas and different places as well. But Uruguay, really Tannat became the champion because Uruguay has a totally different climate to Chile and Argentina. You've got to think more of Uruguay as somewhere between Galicia and Bordeaux. It's Atlantic, maritime, it's a coastal climate. There's quite high humidity. You never irrigate in Uruguay, whereas here you rely on irrigation. Mm-hmm. And so you get totally different profile of the wines. And actually Tannat quite likes a bit of that humidity and gives you a very consistent wine with lots of personality, lots of tannins, lots of acid, plenty of kind of fruit character each year. But then I'd also say the emerging star of Uruguay is their white wines as well, because you have that lovely coastal climate, and in particular Albarino. I think the Albarino from Uruguay, can be on par with Galicia. quite easily. Just beautiful, lovely kind of saline, maritime character, but, great acidity, nice ripe fruit as well.
Okay.
And then the two main regions to keep your eye on is Canelones, which is the main traditional wine region around the area of Montevideo with, 3/4 of the producers based there. And then Maldonado, further towards the coast of Brazil, a real kind of emergence of new producers. And namely, the big producer there is Garçon, they're doing an excellent job with, promoting the wines of Uruguay abroad. But Uruguay is fascinating. I love it.
Well, we'll have to read your book to find out more. Is Tannat named for the tannin in it? Like, is that the association?
Yeah, that's the association.
Okay. All right.
It was interestingly, in Uruguay, it was called Jariague for a very long time because that was the chap that brought it over with him, a Basque immigrant that brought it over with him in the 1800s as well.
That's much harder to spell and say, so I think it was a good move to Tannat.
They changed it to that.
Absolutely. How about Peru? How would you summarize Peru?
Peru is fascinating because it was the first kind of wine country, really, of South America, and that's because the viceroyalty was sat there. That's where they were kind of taking over the empire. And so they largely kind of developed this wine industry to support the Spanish who were there. Unfortunately, Peru's history was interrupted because the Spanish got jealous of all the wine production that they were making and the exports that they were doing. So they, prohibited the production of wine, and everyone had to move to Pisco, to Aguardiente, with all their grapevines. So we're only seeing the kind of recent renaissance of Peruvian wine over Pisco production. And there's lots of international varieties like Tannat, Syrah, Malbec, etc. But I'm most excited about those old Criollo varieties, the Pisco varieties, and some of the kind of more artisanal wines that people are making from that, which typically are white varieties. Mm-hmm. And usually more made in a kind of skin contact, nice kind of orange wine style, and some lovely kind of like juicy, easier to drink with that typical salinity that you get in Peru because most of the wine regions are very close to the coast, sandier soils, so that kind of fruitiness coming through. Very kind of appetizing, easy to drink, simple, kind of unpretentious wines that go really well with the intense Peruvian cuisine. Because aside from the kind of ceviche, which everyone knows, most Peruvian cuisine is actually heavily spiced meat dishes. So, having that kind of more fragrant Criolla style wine works really nicely.
And Pisco, that's a spirit, right? When they had to switch to that? Okay.
Yeah, so Pisco is a brandy.
Okay.
Made from the same wine grapes. So you distill the wine grapes. You distill your wine, actually. You make wine and then you distill it into Pisco. And you've got Pisco made in Peru, you've got Pisco made in Chile, and then in Bolivia, they also make their own version of Pisco, but they call it Singani.
Ah, okay. Bolivia then. Good segue. What's going on in Bolivia wine-wise?
Aside from the Singani, which I do recommend, Bolivia is very interesting. Largely, historically, it develops because of the Potosi mines there, which were, an enormous source of wealth and also brought lots of Europeans to Bolivia, to live there while they were kind of exploiting the mines or, less so working in the mines. And so that's why we had the wine industry really kind of start in that period. And then again, it's more of a recent renaissance that we're starting to see it kind of come back as a wine producing regions rather than Singani or Pisco producing. And I think Tarija is the main area. So that's similar to high altitude Argentina in the north. So very close to Salta, only a few hours driving. And also super high altitude. So quite intense reds, but with nice acidity, quite aromatic whites. But for me, what's most interesting is the Moscatel de Alejandría, which is their main grape variety, which is one of those original ones that came with the Spanish in the 1500s and gave birth to the whole family of Criollo varieties. And they have beautiful wines from Moscatel, dry wines, especially in the region of Sinti. And these Moscatel vines are growing often around peppercorn trees.
Oh.
And so rather than using poles, which we use more commonly today to train vineyards, they would use trees as, the Jesuits would plant trees to train the vineyards. And so they pick up this different flavor because the grapes are growing around peppercorn and other different tree flavors like chañar. And so they pick up these different flavors, and Moscatel can be quite transparent in showing those lovely flavors. You imagine flowers of Moscatel and peach of Moscatel, plus that, pink peppercorn or interesting kind of herbaceous notes. It can be very complex and, they're very simple wines, again, very unpretentious, but delicious.
That's a fascinating combination. And then Brazil, what are they doing?
Oh, everything. I've just come back from 2 weeks traveling around
Ah,
Brazil. We did 3,600 kilometers in 10
oh
days,
my
which was a bit
goodness.
nuts, but
Wow.
but it was so much happening in Brazil. It's really difficult to generalize. But you have the main wine region in the south, Rio Grande do Sul, and that's where the Italian immigrants again came in the 1800s and really, made their mark. But then there was a big change. Everything went to hybrid in the 80s, and we lost a lot of those old kind of Italian varieties. And now, since the kind of 90s and 2000s, the hybrids arrived much earlier than the 80s. 50s, 60s. And now there's a switch to fine wines again. So I'd say the thing that Brazil is achieving quite, across the board is their traditional method sparkling wines,
Uh-huh.
which can be very nice. And then you also have a lot of kind of muscatel, like Asti style, kind of touching on that Italian heritage. And then in terms of white and reds, we've got a massive diversity. There's over 300 different varieties, and there's no champion variety. Some people have kind of picked Merlot as the champion variety, but I don't personally agree with that. I actually think there's more potential in some of those interesting Italian varieties like Terroldego. Marcellan is also doing quite well. You've got a humid climate and warm, so you really need to kind of hone in on what works best there. And then there's some very interesting high altitude developments where they've flipped the harvest on its head and prune during the summer when it's wet and warm and humid, and let the vines, come to fruition in the winter when it's warm enough and it's sunny and dry. And so you get these winter harvest wines and some interesting examples of Syrah and Sauvignon Blanc with that.
Oh, wow. Wow, so much to discover.
But that's a whole other hour-long
Yes,
conversation.
it
Each of
is.
these countries
Yeah.
could be a different episode.
We should have had a mini series here, but I do want to get to the wines. You have a couple wines there to taste. I'd love to hear about them and what they are.
So I picked two that I think kind of represent something interesting happening in different countries. So this is Altos Los Hormigas, who's one of the kind of key producers of Argentina, kind of leading that kind of quality. When I talked about those early pioneers, Attilio Pagli and Alberto Antonini were definitely those pioneers of Malbec. But I'm really enjoying their Blanco at the moment.
Okay.
I haven't opened them because I'm going to drink them tonight.
Sure.
Drink it, but I love their Blanco at the moment because this is a really interesting wine, which is a combination of three varieties: Semillon, Pedro Jimenez, and Chenin Blanc.
Huh.
And it's kind of like looking back to the history of Argentine white wine, because Semillon and Chenin Blanc used to be two of the most planted varieties here in Argentina. And I love the Semillon, the old vine Semillon that you get from Argentina and Chile. And I really recommend trying some of those. But then it's also got Pedro Jimenez, which is actually our most planted white grape variety in Argentina.
Oh.
And it's a native Criollo variety. It's not related to the Spanish Pedro Jimenez. And I'm really interested in the kind of movement to try and bring that back. There's a couple producers, Mariano Nofri is another one, who does a great job in trying to show the potential of Pedro Jimenez. It's a simple grape variety, but it adds like a nice kind of simplicity. And sometimes you need some Pedro Jimenez in your life to kind of balance out the bigger, more expressive grape varieties. And this is delicious. It's a very austere style of white wine. It's one of my favorites and go-tos. It's about 11% ABV. It is 11% ABV. So that's always, nice when you want to have a few glasses in the evening and not think too much about a headache in the morning. And it's just got great acidity and real fruit purity and just feels like a very mountain white wine, which I think is exciting in Argentina today, are these mountain white wines. Not chasing that same kind of New World, like big fruit that we get from like New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. Very much kind of going for austerity, for purity, for minerality, and more about texture than about aroma, which I really enjoy.
That's awesome. Did you have a second wine there that you wanted to show?
I do, yeah.
Yes. Okay. And this one?
This is another of my this is one of my favorite projects in Chile,
Okay.
Vineyards de Alcohuas. And this is an incredible vineyard right in the Elqui Valley. It's the highest kind of altitude commercial vineyard in Chile, 2,200 meters above sea level and tucked into the mountains. Absolutely nuts to go visit. And I first went in this is a special vintage. I first went in 2014 and met one of my kind of best friends today, who's the winemaker there at the time, Emily Faulkner. And she was the founder here is Marcelo Retamal, who for me is hands down one of the best winemakers of Chile. And it's this beautiful project that they've completely, planted these new vines in a virgin territory and are really battling with altitude. It's very intense and hot in the day. You're surrounded by bare rocks. It's incredible. I can upload some photos for you to see. But you've got this really cool night. So you get these beautiful structured wines. So in this case, it's a blend with Syrah, Garnacha, and Petit Syrah. And it's just a very meaty, intense wine with incredible Syrah character, but beautiful acidity and super age-worthy wines that you should hold for several years. And Marcelo Retamal always releases them, with several years of aging, which I think is great. The coolest thing about the vineyard is that it's all kind of built into the rocks. Sorry, the winery is built into the rocks. It's all kind of with the native rocks from the area. And all of the vines are trodden by foot. So that was my first experience, like properly foot treading, was there in Alcoas. And, it's a very kind of natural wine production, but just stellar wines as well.
Oh, wow. We'll link to those in the show notes. So yes, I cannot believe how time has flown. Do you have a most useful wine gadget that you've come across as we start to wrap up here?
I don't. I mean, for me, the most important thing, I could go get it, but like one of those ice bags where, you've got the plastic bag that you can pop your bottle in and you fill it with ice.
Yep.
And it's just a great kind of carrier that you can like literally take your ice. Because I often take wines to restaurants to uncork there. And so I always go with my little plastic bag, which is filled with ice. And I'm so sorry, it's over there.
No, that's okay. That's all right.
But it's that lovely ice bag that, your personalized ice bag where you can keep it cool and then just pop it open when you get there.
I need to get one of those.
Simple, but it does the job.
Absolutely.
And it keeps it cool while you're traveling, so it's perfect.
Yeah. We'll put a link to that also in the show notes. Now, as we wrap up, Amanda, it's been fabulous. Is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to mention?
No, just drink more South American wine. You've got such great value.
Sure.
Like just, drink more South American wine and let me know. I love to know what people are drinking and what they're enjoying. And, I just think there's a world to discover here and it's always such great value. Mm-hmm. And start drinking it now before it's too late, because at some point people are going to wake up and these wines are going to be quite expensive. So
it's true.
Before it's too late, drink it now.
You heard it here first. Where can people find your book and find you online, Amanda?
So in Canada, you want to have a look at Académie de Vin.
Okay.
They're the distributor. And then also all my ebooks and everything are available on my website, South America Wine Guide. And that's where you can find me as well. So southamericawineguide.com. That's my alias on Instagram too. I'm Amanda Barnes. You can find me in YouTube, lots of different places as well. But I'm quite accessible on Instagram.
Excellent.
I haven't really got into X or Twitter as much as...
You're not missing much.
No. Okay, good. Glad to hear.
Yeah. And we'll link to your website and your Instagram and so on, and Académie de Vin on the show notes. So thank you so much for being with us here and for your time, and congratulations on the South American Wine Guide. It's excellent.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to chat with you, Natalie. I look forward to seeing you in Canada one day soon.
Absolutely. That'd be great. Thank you. Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed our chat with Amanda. Here are my takeaways. Number 1, I enjoyed hearing Amanda's recommendations for which types of global dishes you can pair with South American wines. The highly aromatic Torrontés can handle equally flavorful dishes. Number 2, Amanda has inspired me to try more wines from Chile's Equi Valley. It's amazing that some vineyards are planted at 2,200 meters above sea level. And 3, I was interested to learn more about the types of wines they make in other South American countries, such as Uruguay, Peru, Bolivia, and Brazil. I didn't realize that Peru was the first wine region in South America. I would have assumed it was Chile or Argentina. In the show notes, you'll find the full transcript of my conversation with Amanda, links to her website and books, the video versions of these conversations on Facebook and YouTube Live, and where you can order my book online no matter where you live. You can also find a link to take a free online food and wine pairing class with me called The 5 Wine and Food Pairing Mistakes That Can Ruin Your Dinner and How to Fix Them Forever at nataliemclean.com/class. That's all in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/266. Email me if you have a sip, tip, question, or if you've read my book or are in the process of reading it at natalie@nataliemclean.com. I'd love to hear from you. If you missed episode 5, go back and take a listen. I chat about wine and health, the benefits, risks, and surprises with Dr. Edward Miller. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite.
We've suspected a relationship between alcohol and breast cancer for quite a while. And then kind of the big study came out in the British Medical Journal that said even an alcohol beverage a day increases a woman's risk of breast cancer. So there was understandably a lot of concern going on. There were concerns about that study, though, because this same group had previously reported that alcohol consumption adds years to people's lives, reduces cardiovascular disease. The more legit and more interesting, I think, to your audience is that, one, they didn't break it down by type of alcohol in the study at all. And so they said, please go back and do that. And when they did, this same study showed that when people drank 3 or more spirit beverages a day, the women had a 26% increase in their risk of breast cancer. And when they had 3 wines or more a day, there was no increased risk of breast cancer.
If you liked this episode, please email or tell one friend about it this week, especially someone you know who'd be interested in the tips, wines, and stories we shared. It's easy to find my podcast. Just tell them to search for Natalie MacLean Wine on their favorite podcast app. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week. Perhaps a floral Torrontés. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So, subscribe for free now at nataliemaclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.